Welcome to Living Life Juicy. I'm John Losey, your host and guide, as we go about exploring ways that we can be present and kind as we do great things. I spent some time with Jill Culton as she was recovering from promoting Abominable, the amazing movie she wrote and directed for DreamWorks. Jill and I got to know each other while working at a junior high camp, a place called Forest Home. And this was many years ago. And from there, Jill went on to work with some of the most remarkable creative companies out there at the height of their innovation. So she went to CalArts, which is the school that Roy and Walt Disney created, and they had the 9 Old Men, the great Disney animators, teaching there. She then went from CalArts to Pixar with John Lasseter in the early days, from Pixar to Sony, from Sony to DreamWorks, where she just put out her movie. So in our conversation, we explore how to recover from major projects. We talk about how working at camp influenced her job today. We also ask what it looks like at the early days of Pixar, and also kind of what keeps you from being creative, some hints on how regular people like us can tap into our creativity. So enjoy the conversation. Conversation with me. It's so good to see you.
Thanks, John. It's been a while, but I'm so excited to be on your show and so excited to just catch up with you in general.
Yeah. So it's called Living Life Juicy, and it's this idea about how can we be present and kind as we go about doing great things. And I know you just got done doing a really great thing, but I want to hear you just got done promoting Abominable. And I'm sure we'll talk about that, but what are you up to right now? What's on your plate?
Well, it's so crazy because every time you come off from a creative endeavor like a film, we had a very short production schedule on Abominable. It was 1.5 years, and normally you have about 3 to 4 years to do an animated film. And so there are circumstances around that, but we had to really just work quite hard, 12 to 14-hour days and almost all my weekends. And then right after that, your whole body just wants to relax and crash. And then you have press and promotion. We went on for 5 to 6 months of press around the world. We were a co-production with China, so I was back and forth to China. And then you start the award circuit. And so it just is kind of never ending. So at the end of all of that, I finally kind of told everyone, like, I need a break, but yet this is the perfect time where everyone wants to talk to you about your next film. So that's always such an interesting kind of struggle for creative people because, of course you're excited about getting offers for your next thing. So you want to be very present, but it's also this nurture where you have to take care of yourself or you're not going to be your best creative self for your next endeavor. And, along with that, just a sidebar is that I feel like if you don't take any time off in between, sometimes you take your old movie and you start to it kind of bleeds into your next project. And I think it's really important to make that clear break so that every project you do, whether it's a movie or a poster or a little animated short or a book that you're doing, that you make that break so that each one has their own identity.
So what do you do to recover and what do you do to transition?
That's a good question. I'm in the process of it right now. I walk a lot and hike a lot. And my main home is in Northern California, kind of in this little town called Fairfax. And it's literally 2 streets up in Marin County, and it's just surrounded by woods. And my boyfriend Eric and I have 2 dogs that are 100 pounds each. So Sasha and Cooper are giant, and they love to hike, and we can hike right outside our back door. And so we hike a lot. And then when I'm here in LA, I have a loft that I rent because I have to be in 2 places. And for me, that in itself is healing. A lot of people who live here and work here say, why do you do this crazy commute back to Northern California? But for me, the woods and being surrounded by the woods and nature is something that regenerates me and replenishes me. And when I'm walking in the woods, I just feel just this healing power come into me. And so it's important for me, just for me personally, to do this crazy thing where I live in two places, but I walk that, and I feel like that almost clears your mind. And being in nature again just kind of regenerates new ideas for me.
Yeah. So a mutual friend of ours reminded me of that this year. I put out word about asking about when these people who I've worked with experienced me at my best and all. And Beth Slavkov reminded me that I needed to stay in touch with both music, but also the outdoors.
Yeah.
And doing what I do, it's so easy to get caught up on doing video stuff and working in the buildings and the offices with organizations. And she just reminded me it was so refreshing, number one, just to be reminded of that. And then getting out right now, my place is Point Magoo Rock.
Right.
You
Love
know
it.
that down here.
Yeah, I
And
love
so
it.
I go down there at the state beach and I pull my truck out there and I can just kind of sit there and see who visits going across the shore. Almost every time there's a sea lion or dolphins or something like that out there. And that just, even though they're just momentary, just, snatches of a day, so refreshing to do that.
It is. And it's interesting. Water is also, ocean and water is another big healing force in my life. I always have to be in it somehow. My nickname at home is Water Baby because I have to be in it. And I the older I get, the more I realize when we're younger, we pour all this time into our art, whether it's music, writing, drawing was my expertise when I was younger. And I would just carve out so much time in my day. Like I'd have passes to the zoo where I'd go spend the whole afternoon drawing, and that was priority because getting better at this craft was priority. And it seems like the older we get and the more um, career choices we make that are professional, we put our time less and less in those artistic endeavors, and yet that's our craft. But I do find myself going, God, why don't I take the entire day and draw, like I used to? And it just feels like there's so much, there's so busy. But I have to keep reminding myself in these times in between to go back to that and to give myself permission to spend a whole day drawing or a whole day doing music or listening to music or walking the beach, that is just as important as all the rest of it, if not more.
And I think a lot of the executives I work with can relate to that, even though they're not artists or whatever, but they feel like their craft, which is working with people and strategic thinking, they lose touch with what they were once really, really good at because they get involved in the minutia of the day.
Exactly.
And they're getting paid to think really big, but they get sucked into the details.
It's so true.
So tell me this, do you have a way like that you can intentionally put a period on one project so that you can start the new sentence of the next one? Do you have any intentionality around that?
Yeah, I mean, I oftentimes do small, this sounds weird, small rituals to put a close to the old. And that helps. And sometimes it's a matter of taking, like in this case, I have a lot of toys and images that were on my wall, covering my wall in my office as inspiration for me, whether they be plush toys or backpacks and swag from the movie or little drawings that people did for me, making of books, cups, mugs, things that we accumulated out of parties and things over the years. And they're wonderful memories, and I want to preserve those memories, but you also have to find a place to put those memories, a certain place, whether it's a place in your office that you keep a couple of those out or a box that you put them in for now. And it's important to almost have closure to that part. And then, like I said, when you're walking, when you're spending quiet time, which is always uncomfortable coming off from a project. You're almost hyperventilating, and just to try to breathe is totally hard. But when you do that intentional silence, which is always uncomfortable, you just start to let yourself kind of dream again and let your mind be open to the silliest things that pop into it. And I also go, like, the other day I took my walk up to the Norton Simon Museum, and I have a membership there, and it's thank goodness it's on like a couple mile walk for me. But a lot of times I'll go into the Norton Simon and I'll pick one thing, like a Degas statue, one of his sculptures that's rough and not perfectly finished, and I'll spend an hour just looking at that and ask myself, why am I attracted to this? And just, those kinds of things are really important, to cleanse the palate and then to let yourself be fascinated and enthralled and reinvigorated by something new.
Yeah. So your practice of taking everything down, it reminds me of an old story about somebody from the West going to somebody in the East and saying, "I want to learn from you." So the Eastern philosopher puts down a cup of tea, empty cup, and he starts filling it and filling it and filling it until it's overflowing. And the guy from the West says, "No, wait, stop! It's overflowing. You can't put any more in there." And the other guy says, he has his teacup, and he says, "Yes. And until you empty your cup, there's nothing I can put in."
Right.
And that's what it reminds me of, is that your cup was so full with this last project, and in order to create more space for something new, and it kind of creates this dilemma of, do you take everything off the wall and stare at a blank wall, which is so tough for a lot of people to do,
Right.
or do you leave something or put maybe just random things up there? You just said that you go to the Norton Simon. Is there anything else that you do to help spur those new and crazy ideas?
It's images, like you said. I'll go through books and I'll find new images. It's reading new articles, like, that just get my mind going. It's listening to new music, which is weird, but when I walk, I listen to music, and I either listen to kind of audio teaching books, or I listen to music, and I will put on, a lot of times soundtracks are perfect for me because they don't have words to distract. So if you plug in a soundtrack right now, one of my favorite ones is from my composer on Abominable, Rupert Gregson Williams, and he did Hacksaw Ridge, which is probably my all-time favorite soundtrack right now. And you put in these soundtracks and images just come while you're walking. They just come. And for me, I kind of have to be a little bit in movement, like sometimes sitting still and listening to music, I get antsy. So just that, process of walking and listening, or listening to, like I said, new kinds of music, something that you haven't listened to in a while. All that stuff, it's so powerful. And we kind of underestimate the power of art, music, nature, all those things in our lives. And again, it is what can stir the pot. It is what can renew you all over again. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty powerful, and it's not that hard to do.
Have you ever heard of he's a improv jazz pianist named Keith Jarrett?
No.
Okay. You'll dig this story and also the music. So
great.
Back in I think it was either the late 70s, early 80s, he was touring Europe doing these improv piano, solo piano concerts. He goes to Culton, Germany.
Yeah.
And they're going to have a concert, and the young promoter, like, somehow they messed up the type of piano. So he goes in there to practice and just to check things out. It's a tiny piano, out of tune, sticky keys, all that kind of stuff. And he's like, he's having some people come with him to record different concerts. He said, "I can't do this." So the story is that the promoter went out to his car, pouring rain, just begging, "Please, you got to do this. We got all these people showing up. You got to do it." So they did their best to get the piano. It couldn't get totally in tune, and they tried to unstick some of the keys. So he goes in there, and they decided to record it just to show how bad things could be. So they record it. It's called the Culton concert. And he just did amazing things because the limitations forced him to think differently about how he did his craft. Turned into the best-selling solo jazz improv album of all time. I think it still might be up there.
That's
And you listen to it, the story is one thing, but then you listen to it and how he actually uses the limitations to create something great.
That's awesome. I mean,
So
it again, like you never know. I think the tendency is when you do something that works well, there is always a little fear that you're not gonna top that. So there's a tendency to want to hold on to exactly what you did and exactly the way you did it. And there's a difference between clinging to the past and learning from what you gained from that last experience and then carrying it into the next experience without clinging to that so that
yeah.
you can change, and I feel like he was forced to do that on the spot. And sometimes, unless we're forced to, we have to force ourselves,
Yeah, and that's what I do when I come in and facilitate groups is I basically help them get uncomfortable and move into new places.
Yeah.
And it's such a great, I mean, I learned that I can't facilitate my own groups because if I'm the leader that's trying to do it, I'm clinging to something as well as all my people. So when I bring an outside facilitator in, all of a sudden this person doesn't have the baggage that I have and can ask the hard questions to lead the group further on. And instead of replicating, you're actually growing.
That's so great. I also sometimes feel like, and this is something that I've seen repeated somewhat in my life in between um, projects, sometimes during projects actually. But I used to look at when chaos struck, whether it's within a studio, in the middle of your project, or at the end of your project, and whether it be chaos in your personal life, chaos in your extended family, chaos in that you have to suddenly move, or your job goes away, which has happened to me before, right in the middle of a movie. When chaos happens, we have a tendency to just kind of freak out and start going, why is this happening? But what I've learned to embrace is just that sometimes chaos is a tap on the shoulder that things need to change. Things are changing, and you have to trust that they're changing for the better. And oftentimes, if things are too smooth, life will throw chaos at you in order to make you change and grow. And I'll give you one example. At the end of all this, when we got to award seasons finally with Abominable, I had traveled for 6 months, gotten very little sleep. And then we started the award circuit. And the award circuit is basically you campaign for the awards. So if you're up for, say, a Critics' Choice Awards or a PGA Awards or the Academy Awards or whatever, you go on a little bit of a circuit where you go to New York and you do these things where you're part of the contenders speaking circuit, where you're talking about the film and trying to get a buzz about the film so that people will vote. So you do this whole thing. This is all after a big thing of press. And then the awards actually happen. And we were lucky enough to be up for 5 awards. We won 1. But what people don't realize is that those red carpet events are like every other day for 2 weeks. So you have to get dolled up. You have to be there at noon. They last till midnight. You have to wear new clothes every time. And it's kind of brutal, and there's, runway and the whole deal. And so I started to get sick quite a few months before that awards even started, bronchitis and on antibiotics and trying to keep up, but my body was starting to just give way, right? It was like, you have to rest. And finally, I went to the Critics' Choice Awards and I had 4 more award shows to go to, and my body completely gave out. And I'm talking lost half my hair within a month, got ridiculously sick, could not get out of bed. And life threw me this crazy curveball and said, stop already. And the award shows and all this, it doesn't matter. You need to rest. And finally, with like the legs kicked out of me, I had to step away, which is terrifying because you think, oh gosh, am I going to miss an opportunity that comes up? But the fact is, it doesn't matter. And you have to trust that if 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 I hadn't, now I realize, now a month into this recovery and my hair is growing back and I'm feeling much better. Um, if I had not stepped back, I would have just kept blasting forward. And I needed this break to cleanse, to reinvigorate my creativity, to think really carefully about what I want to do next, and to just refresh who I am as a person and gain that strength that can just get beaten out of you along the road. And so I, when it first happened, I was like, why? And now I'm so grateful. And that sounds weird, but I've had to come to that other side where I'm like, thank goodness I had this almost excuse to take a huge break. And
Well, and it's so sad that we have to, that has to be an excuse. So
right,
I don't teach time management anymore. It's, it doesn't matter how well you manage your time and how wonderful your calendar looks. If you're not managing your energy and your focus, it's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It may look good, but you're still going down.
yes,
And so I encourage people to think about those three things, energy, focus, and pace, like a graphic equalizer. And
right,
you need to know that you can only have that high pace for so long.
right,
Um, and a high pace takes high energy, and it also means you can't focus well. And, if you need to focus and, really, manage your time and your pace well, it's going to take a lot of energy. So all those things are interrelated. It's just so frustrating for so many people, including myself, that you've got to get blindsided by something for that, for you to go to that recovery mode.
right. I
So,
know.
oh, go ahead.
We have to all get better, I think, I think our particular society does not necessarily support nor honor those people who want to step away and take care of themselves. And yet these are the very people that, the workforce is calling to be at peak level for, ridiculous amounts of time, right? But
Yeah.
so it has to be up to us to step away. And I'm, culprit of not being able to do that so well.
Yeah. So while you were talking about, the interviews and the red carpets and having to get dolled up all the time, I'm thinking about the Jill that I met back at the ranch at Forest Home, working at camps. I'm curious about what are some, so we met working at a summer camp, leading junior hires just in really weird things. I'm curious, when you think back on that, what are some of your best memories of working at camp?
Oh gosh, it's, Forest Home at that camp that we were at, and we worked together for years, John, summer camps and winter camps. And it does become part of your, it is cemented in my life as some of my favorite times ever. And I think as young adults, you're, away from the world up in this beautiful canyon that is surrounded by nature. And, in your 20s, you're left to take care of groups of hundreds of junior hires, and I think, why are they crazy? They let us do this. But it was just so fun. I think it was the beginning of having to learn what leadership is, um, personally, and yet at the same time finding that great balance that I try to remember now, where everything is chaos in camps. You know that. It's like you try to wrangle everyone, everyone's going everywhere else. Like you try to have a sleep out on the meadow and bears come. I mean, it's just
Yep.
every day you get thrown a wild card and you have to figure it out. And in your 20s, you just do that automatically. I think the older you get and the more stakes, or if there's money involved, it's harder to kind of come up with that, crazy plan to change things. But we're required to do that on a regular basis. And as creative people, I think that was Forest Home and Camp was kind of the birth of trying out that kind of creative leadership where you have to change things on the fly and you have to toss things to each other as leaders and say like, hey, what if we, and then you grab the ball and say, yeah, let's like change this whole thing right now. And that's some of my favorite moments, is when things went crazy and we just had to make it work and it actually turned out better.
I think about, because there is a definite structure and plan and everything is all kind of set. And then you step into it and every week was something different, where the plan was still there, but something interesting would happen and we'd have to adjust, and you think about that final last competition that went all morning long, walking all over the grounds, and that kind of fun. Or I still the storytelling aspect. Remember telling the Chronicles of Narnia?
Yes.
Um,
You know, you know how we used to, and I'll just tell the viewers, like, what was so great is at the beginning, we each had a chunk of the story to tell. And we would, around the campfire with 200 kids and counselors there, we would each tell our part of the story and then leave the audience hanging so that the next night, another one of us would step up and continue the story. And it would last for the whole 5 days of camp. And as the camp went on, because we did 11 camps
yeah.
one summer, as the camps went on, we would start bending the story ever so slightly to leave each other hanging with something that the next person just didn't expect. Like, I remember, I think it was Greg that left one of us hanging with one of the kids, like, falls into this, through this hole, and hears giant footsteps coming and looks up, and there's the Aunt Jemima syrup bottle, like, reaching down to grab the man, and you'd just be like, what? That's not in.
Okay, I remember that because that happened to me, and it was Melinda
Oh my
who did
God.
it. And I just, right that night, I was just angry. I was just, how could you do, Aunt Jemima? C.S. Lewis is spinning in his grave right now. But then it was one of those things that was, I look back on it, and even it just took me a little bit to recover. And then it was just the wonderful challenge of how do you bring it back?
Right.
But since that, I wove that into all the, like, I led camps. I was like the director of camps and all that kind of stuff. I made storytelling two things I made required for my staff. They needed to learn how to tell a good story, and they needed to have to learn how to cook over a campfire. And those two things, in fact, staff continue to come back. Mostly they love talking about the storytelling, and then they like tell me how smoky and dirty they got cooking around a campfire. But one of my favorite memories, and you taught like what we call like a skills class. You did cartooning, and I think you were in your first couple of years at Cal Arts.
Right.
And I remember when we were getting ready to do it. It was on our orientation week, and you drew a caricature of me playing guitar. That traveled with me for probably 10 or 12 years afterwards. Well, I put it up in the different places I was at, and to me, it brought me back to my camp days, because it had the guitar, it had this baseball cap that I always wore, and it had these duct tape flip flops that I used to always wear. So, that's one of my favorite memories there.
I was going to say the one thing that has been pretty great is that in animation in general, especially my regular work day, I probably have between 8 and 12 to 14 meetings a day. And a lot of times your dailies are either in a room with 51 animators and you're looking at shots and giving notes, or launching and you're there with your head of animation, or you're in a big room with maybe 70 people that are all doing effects and different stuff, and you're going through shots. And there is something incredibly, this sounds weird, incredibly similar to those camp days for me, where there's this camaraderie where you're all kind of there for the same purpose and goal. And it is a wild card where you're like, well, what if, and you have to change things ever so slightly. And constantly I keep trying to like get people to chime in, put their own voice in and be a participant in the group. And it's funny because a lot of people who have worked with me say, oh my God, no one ever does that. We work with a lot of directors, they never do that. And I feel like that's a benefit that I got from camp days, which is, these films, the more I do them, or stories I should say in general, the more I used to feel like I have to come up with a story. Like it's the challenge, I have to come up with a story. Nowadays, I actually 1,000% believe that the stories are out there wanting to be told, and you get tapped on the shoulder and you get picked as the shepherd for these particular stories. And the biggest thing you have to learn to do is listen. and the bits and pieces of those stories can come through anyone, and you're the filter to know if that piece of the story fits or does not fit through the filter. So where I used to feel like, no, 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 I can't listen to anyone because I have to come up with a story. Now I realize the story is out there. And sometimes it's those voices, the unexpected voices that come in that add a piece of the puzzle that you're like, ah, that's it. And you don't have to worry. You don't have to be controlling about it because you're the filter. You get to pick what goes in and what goes out of that filter. And basically you're listening to the story and you say, ah, that's right, that rings true to me, or no, that doesn't quite fit. That sounds very hippie.
No, okay. Couple of
But
things to defend your hippiness.
yeah,
Um,
I mean, but it literally, it feels like that now. Like that's how it feels. And I feel like the more I lean into that, the less controlling I am and the less human error goes into this process, because I feel like it's a bigger process than that. It's a
yeah. So
spiritual process.
a couple of things just to affirm what you're talking about. You know the band OK Go?
Yeah.
Okay, so they are the ones who do the music videos where they were on like treadmills, and then these things where they were playing with the speed and all that kind of stuff. I think it was a TED talk where they were asked the question, how do they produce, how do they generate such great stuff? And they say, we don't generate it, we discover it. And they talked about their process. I call it sandboxing. And basically what they did with all those things is say, let's take some weird things and put them in the room together and see what we come up with. Let's play with what's out there and see what generates. And that, what they're doing is they're not starting with a blank slate. They're starting with some really interesting combination of things and play.
Right.
And what you talked about, where you are the filter, you are the one, that the story's out there, the good work is out there. You just have to create a space where it can be found.
Right.
And that's what we try and teach, like leaders who depend on their own resources, skill, ability, and insight are limited by themselves.
Right.
The ones who are confident enough to open up the room and create a space are the ones who find the game changers.
Yeah.
And I think that was what we were about at camp. Believe it or not, I think people
Right.
don't get what teaching at camp is about. It's about creating a space where the kids can find new things. We create a structure and we create a space, but it's really about the kids making memories and finding their voice.
Right. It's so true. And I think at that age, also one of the things that I realize is that what this requires is for you to completely dump your ego at the door. And that is something that is sometimes difficult to do, for sure, especially if you're unsure of, you're walking into a room full of people and you're unsure of the creative process. You can do one of two things. The people that I think, oh, they're insecure, are the ones that come off as the most confident and don't want to listen to anybody. And the ones that walk in and go, hey, look, there's still pieces in here I'm working with. Let's discuss this, blah, blah, blah. I always think, oh, that's the most confident person in the room. And it's really weird how that works, because psychologically we want to say like, oh gosh, we're supposed to be in charge. Let's hold on to all the reins. But really the best leaders, it requires to let go and to listen and to know that ultimately you're making the choice. So you don't have to be controlling. Yeah. It's an odd thing, but it checking egos at the door, when everyone in your team and sub-teams do that, magic happens. I mean, it really is the best of the best. This last team I had was probably the best team I've ever had. And what it was that I probably had the most seasoned team I've ever had. And it was really, they came off from working on How to Train Your Dragon 3. There was brand new software that came out. The studio had pared down a bit. And so this was like the best of the best. And they were primed and I got them all. And this was the most egoless team I've ever had. And we had the best time, because to do a film in a year and a half is impossible. And the only way we did that was by pulling each other into meetings. And, I would have a story brainstorming meeting and say, get my head of effects in here, get my, head of animation in here, get my head of layout in here. Like, let's all just do this together. We're just going to do this together. And there was no egos in the room. And it was amazing.
It sounds like Traveling Wilburys. You
Yeah,
have
I
this
love
super
that.
group of
I love that.
people, and who all are, most of them, like, others might describe as difficult to work with, but when they got in the same room, they were all so mutual. They were mutual fans of each other,
Right.
and so the egos were naturally gone because they looked at, and like Tom Petty's looking at Bob Dylan going, oh my gosh. Bob
Right.
Dylan's looking at George Harrison, and George Harrison is looking at Roy Orbison, and they're all just, and so when you watch some of the behind the scenes footage, you see these immensely talented and amazing, I mean, strong egos and characters just lay aside everything they've got, and all of a sudden they've got this mutual creativity going on. It's amazing. And going back to the camp stuff, junior hires can sniff out ego and insecurity, and can laser focus on it. So if you don't get secure fast, it's a tough summer.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. And there's a balance in there. You have to have, it's weird. You have to have a strong ego to let other people's opinions come in. And
Yeah.
yet you have to have, you have to let your ego go to say, okay, I don't have all the answers.
Yeah, but the ego becomes about creating that environment where people can excel rather than worried about your being excellent.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. That's
I
exactly.
want to talk a little bit about you. You've been creating characters, not just the caricature you drew of me, but you've been creating characters for a while now. And I want to know a little bit about kind of how do you go about like finding and creating that character?
There's creating a character is kind of twofold, and sometimes I've been lucky in my life. I got to design Jessie the cowgirl, which was so fun, way back when at Pixar, and that was, she already had a personality in the writing of that. So what was great about her was that she was probably the first Pixar character who was a female, who was kind of a tomboy and a little bit more rough and tumble, and I could definitely relate to that. And so when John said, hey, could you take a stab at designing her? I was so thrilled because I felt like I got who she was. And now the interesting thing is I'm doing more of the writing and creating the characters from the intellectual side. And I have designers that design those characters with me. And it's a two-part where my last character designer, Nico Marley, who's a really good friend of mine. He also designed Kung Fu Panda and How to Train Your Dragon, and he designed Abominable. And he's just prolific as far as a designer goes. And what's so great is, you create these characters, and really you start, when you're creating a character, you start with kind of what is out of balance in their life. And you ask yourself, usually most movies start with a world where something's out of balance. And the simple explanation is at the end of the movie, you want that character's world to be in balance, but maybe in an unexpected way, a way that you didn't see coming. In Abominable, this character Yi, I really wanted to create a girl that wasn't kind of a princess stereotype. Again, that was more rough and tumble, a little bit stubborn, a little bit of the kind of character that leaps before she looks, which is definitely part of who I was. And her out of balance is that she's not really connected to her family at the beginning of the film, and we don't really know why. And throughout the film, we realize that her dad has passed away, and she's kind of kept herself in suspended animation, not really moving forward with her life or connecting to her friends and her family because of that. And again, you always, as artists, end up pulling from your own life. And I think literally, this is so weird, but subconsciously, I was pulling from a time in my life when I was 18, which was around the age of Guy. He's 8 or 16 in this movie, where my parents got a divorce. And my dad was a big influence in my life. He taught me to travel. He taught me the love of music. He was always after me to learn things. And when he moved out, I think I really interpreted that like a death in my life. And so subconsciously, I wrote this movie not realizing that that was what I was putting into this movie. And Yee's dad taught her the love of travel. She has a map, a journey she wants to go on, all this stuff, music that she
Oh,
loved, or violin. This was literally from my own life. And it wasn't until halfway through the movie where we were in production where I kept getting asked the question, why, you know, as Yee's dad passed away, that I had to write a foreword to the making of book. And in that process, I realized that's what I had done, is I put my own life into this. And I think as artists, you have to be careful and be aware of this, is that regardless if you mean to or not, you're gonna, art is therapy. You are working things out of your life, whether you're writing songs, whether you're writing a book, whether you're writing a movie, your own life is going to be out there on the screen somewhere for the world to see, because you can't help it. And thank goodness that these things are working themselves out through our art. I think it's such a blessing, you know. But it was an unexpected blessing on some levels. Like I knew I was creating a tomboy that was like me, but I didn't know she was going through similar feelings I had gone through. And what's great about that too is there's truth in the movie because of that. It's coming from a truthful place, you know. So these are the kind of things I work on to create a whole character. But then I go to my character designer and we talk through these things. And what I love about the design of Yee that Nico came up with is that she is wearing tights and striped socks over her tights and weird hiking boots and shorts over her tights with a mismatched shirt with a, you know, and she just looks like a free spirit. She looks like an artist. She looks like someone who just gets up in the morning and puts on whatever. And then in the voice of Chloe Bennett, who we got to voice Yee, she's got this kind of raspy voice. But what I love about Chloe is the more I got to know her, and I was still writing the film, rewriting and rewriting as do it through the whole process. The more I got to know Chloe, the more I got to put Chloe into the movie. So she is a tomboy, and she, you know, even though she's this beautiful TV personality, as a person, she grew up in Shanghai with her grandma, and she was not, you know, she was a little rough and tumble girl who grew up with brothers that beat her up, and, you know, and she just was this character. And so all these factors, the voice work, the character designer, the arc of the movie, the problem you set up, or the imbalance of the character in the beginning and how you want to rebalance them shapes who these characters are. And then, strangely enough, not to go on about this, that's your main character. Your supporting characters around them all serve one purpose, and that's to help your character change or bring out parts of them that need to change. So even the construct of the supporting characters are all built around what the main character is going through.
Yeah. So just about that story, when I went and saw the movie, and I'm sitting there, visually stunning. I mean, the imagery is just amazing, and then the music matched it, you know, and the story was really good, but with that, the surrounding images and music, just it was stunning. I still, like, as soon as the scene comes on when the field turns into a wave, I said, "There's Jill. There's Surfer Jill that, you know, that was up in the mountains but would get to the water whenever she could." And it was funny is just at about the same time, my son stumbled across. I've got a 6-year-old, and he stumbled across a movie called Surf's Up.
Yes.
And I'm looking at the credits and it says special thanks to Jill Culton. I'm going, well, of course.
Great. I was talking to the producer of that just yesterday. He's a good friend of mine. All the people who worked on that film are great friends. And that was such a fun, that was at Sony when I was on Open Season. They were doing Surf's Up. And I talked to them extensively about just kind of the zen of surfing and you know, so it was great. It was super fun for me because I got to, you know, chat with those guys and help that film some. But yeah, just this movie in particular, one of my goals that I set out to do was to create something that was musically, visually, story-wise, and character-wise all holding like its own space. And the story, because of that, the story is fairly simple. But the characters themselves are quite complex. All of the characters are quite complex, and the music takes front stage, front and center. And then the visuals start in a very realistic world. But they get more and more whimsical as the movie goes on, as well as the color palette. And that was another really big goal that was incredibly tough to work on with our incredible team. Max Boaz was my production designer. He just did a phenomenal job on this, as well as Mark Edwards, who was our visual effects supervisor, who, when you come to scenes like that wave, or creating koi fish out of clouds, there's no out of the box software to do that. And it takes a year of trial and error to do those scenes. So we got those scenes, all the scenes that had a magic component, in the pipeline a year ahead of time, with a year and a half to do the film, like literally jam them in so that we could have time to fail before we saw the successes. And literally some of those scenes were done like by the skin of our teeth, like in the last month, where we're like, woohoo, like we see just, we all saw the bad version over and over and over again, all knowing what it was going to lead to, and then got it just in time, and
well, isn't the best stuff always like that? I mean, the most
yeah.
innovative, creative, out there things are always by the skin of your teeth, because you're the one that's pushing out. I mean, you're going. One advice I got one time: when you get new software, read the user's guide, and then throw it out and make it do what you want it to.
Right. That's so true.
So,
it's so true.
I'm curious if Jesse and Yi got together, what would they get along? What would that be like? Kind of how would those two characters match up? And I realize with Jesse, you just got to do the visual, but it did embody a lot of who you were. And Yi is the same way. How would they interact?
I think they'd be kind of best buds. I mean, honestly, it is so funny because what I kind of love about going outside the box with these female characters is just, for me, it's not outside the box. It's like an outpouring of kind of who I am as a person. But I just love sometimes, like, this sounds weird. A lot of times in movies where you have a female character, people are afraid to make them flawed or ridiculous or the person that everyone laughs at, or that usually goes to the male character. And people treat female characters very preciously. And I set out not to do that, to make them flawed, to make you be able to laugh at them, to make them the butt of the joke, and I think that you love them more because of that, and I don't know why that is, but I think, again, and sometimes when the princess movie trope came along, it was like, treat them beautiful, treat them precious. And a sidebar about me is, when that same girl that you knew back at camp who wore sweatpants and flip-flops or Ugg boots and t-shirts every day, that's still who I am. And so when it comes to things like the awards show where you have to get all dressed up, I freak out. That's like my total, like a lot of women love that. You get to go shopping for gowns and you get to get all, I just have a total meltdown. That's like that I can talk in front of 5,000 people at some like CinemaCon, put me in a gown and I just don't even know who I am anymore.
Yeah, we all have different comfort zones and different things freak us out. So, but is there, like, you may have already talked about either Jesse or Yi, but is there a character that you've worked on or worked with that you'd want to hang out with in real life?
There's quite a few of them. I mean, one of the things that I really loved about Abominable was when, when I first started, there was no other Yeti movies out there, let's just say. And then by the time we came back to it, there was a weird gap in between these projects. And I'll just say briefly, like, I wrote the film about 7 years ago. It went into production. All this stuff happened to the studio. The studio changed heads like 3 times. In the process, they didn't want to make the movie. They took me off the movie, put a different director on the movie. I was off doing something else. And then the studio changed hands again, and the new head that came in said, I'm not sure about this movie. And someone at the studio said, did you ever see Jill's version of this movie? And he said, well, that's the movie I want to make. And then called me and said, can you come back and finish it in a year and a half? And I was like, oh my God, you know, so, and I really loved this movie. So I came back, and at that point there had been a couple of Yeti films that were already out there. So I thought, gosh, when do you get to create a character that is mythological and doesn't have that much in the lore about it? Like I typed in Yeti, Google, even when I first started writing it, and there's not that much about it. We know they live on Mount Everest. We know we've seen footprints. People think they've seen footprints. There's not a lot to it. It's not like leprechauns where there's rainbows and pots of gold, and there's nothing to them. So I wanted to create some new character that wasn't just walking on two legs expectedly, but that had more mannerisms. You know, of course, I stole a lot of that from my dogs, my giant 100-pound dogs that I've had over the years. And I didn't want him to talk. I wanted a main character who didn't speak. And I thought that would be not only a fun challenge for the animators, but a fun challenge for me. And I communicate with my dogs all the time. They go to the door when they want out. I can tell when they're pissed at me. I can tell when they're happy. You know, you can just read them, you know, and you don't need to have a human conversation with them. And then I wanted this character to have something special, something more that we could find out about him along the way. And that power to control nature got to utilize something important in my life, nature. And I thought, how can I make the audience feel like I feel when I'm hiking in Yosemite and you're up way off in the Sierra and you have that crazy mountain high that you get where you just breathe in the air and you feel so small and everything just gets giant around you, and you just feel the wonder of being alive. And I thought, how could I bring that feeling to an audience? And so Everest's ability to take nature and heighten it was an attempt to do that, you know. And the connection to music is so powerful in my life. It's such a big influence. And thankfully, Rupert Gregson Williams and I got along so well. He was just so into this movie, and I can't thank him enough. He is just genius. And, you know, came in with these violinists that were like the best of the best. And like even that one scene on the rooftop where she plays for the first time, he had one of his best violinists, one of the best in the world, who lives in London. His name is Tom, play. And I came back to him and I said, you know, it's not dirty enough. You know, I want to hear the strings a little more. She's young. And so it needs to have a little more flaw. And like, by the time she gets to the Buddha and plays, then it can be this, but like, can we dirty it up a little so you can hear the grit, you know? And he was like, totally get it. And like, then Tom's sister, who's also just this insanely great, you know, violinist, did that kind of dirtier version. And it's so beautiful, you know?
So it sounds like you and Yeti would go out and get a drink.
We'd totally.
Everest. I mean, who
totally.
would you invite from your other projects? Would you invite anybody to happy hour with you and Everest?
Probably Boog in open season would get along pretty good with Everest. I think they would be like a good pairing. But also, it's funny, like the Eddie Izzard character, Burnish, I'd love to hang out with that guy. Like he's like, you know, the guy who has tons of money but was obsessed with finding a Yeti his whole life, you know. And he's the villain in our, for those who haven't seen the movie, he's the villain who gets redeemed at the end. And that's what I love about him. But I think part of that influence is just hanging out with Eddie Izzard and knowing him as a person. He's so fascinating. He's one of those few people you meet in your life where you know him as a comedian and an actor, but after you get to know him, you start to go, like, you're in awe in his presence, because he's a guy who in his 50s decided he wanted to run a marathon, and then decided he would run 27 marathons in 27 days, and did it, and skipped one day, and then ran a double marathon the next day. Like, who does that? He's insane.
That's nuts.
As far as like his mindset and his like determination, mind over matter, is just insane.
Well, and his character in the movie is that he's this rich guy who's 1,000% in on everything he does until he realizes he's wrong, and then he's 1,000% in the other way.
Totally. And I love that. I love that about his character. And he was really fun to animate. Christoph's run, he was our lead animator on that. He was just phenomenal and did just a great job. So it was very fun.
Hey, I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about organizations. And you've had the opportunity to work in, I mean, people would call them the most creative and innovative organizations out there. You went to school at CalArts, which was the, created by Disney animators back in the 70s.
Right.
You worked at Pixar, created by Lasseter, who was coming out of Disney and all that stuff. You worked at Sony, you worked at DreamWorks, all known as really creative and innovative organizations. What do you think, what about those organizations make people see them as innovative and creative? What do you think is like the secret sauce for those?
You know what's crazy is that some of my favorite times it's weirdly similar to Forced Home in a weird way, or at camp, is that there's a bunch of us there making it up as we go. And it's not until you look back on it to realize like how great it really was, right? And I have to say, early days of Pixar, this was a commercial company that was doing Lifesavers Dots commercials and Listerine bottle commercials with boxing Listerine bottle. And but they were innovative in computer animation, and they happened to, and again, like the hub of films is in LA, and they were way up north, and there was really nothing up north. There was ILM, PDI hadn't even begun then, which was well, PDI actually was there. It was a commercial company as well down in Redwood City, but there was really nothing up in San Francisco. And when Pixar broke off from ILM, they had created their own software from scratch. And then there was a time in history where Disney decided to start a division called Fringe Projects. And Fringe was basically like, hey, maybe there's other mediums out there we should take a look at. We'll toss some money towards new innovations. And two of the projects they picked were both in the Bay Area. One was to give Pixar money to start to do Toy Story, first computer animated feature film. And the other one was they gave money to Skellington to do A Nightmare Before Christmas with Tim Burton, which was all stop motion puppet animation. And so, this was kind of the Wild West. They're throwing some stuff out there to see what sticks. And Pixar, we got there and they were basically hiring 12 animators, and I was one of the 12 that got chosen. And it was like no other place I've ever started. None of us had ever, I was a 2D hand-drawn animator. So was everyone who started. We started on the same day. And I remember Andrew Stanton and Pete Doctor wheeling out a whiteboard, and they said, okay, today we're learning Unix. And and it was like, we learned like code, and the software was so, it was innovative for its time, but compared to now, it was all math, and I was wanting to wear the shirt that said, I was told there was going to be no math,
Yeah.
And it was incredibly difficult, and there were, the software was being updated every day, and it just almost felt chaotic. And there was a time where here's 12 animators who we're all under the age of maybe 30, and a lot of us under the age of 22. And we're learning the software, we're trying to use it, and a lot of it's not user friendly yet. And so we're kind of banging our heads. And here's these people in the offices around us. We're in cubicles. The offices around us are filled with people with their double doctorates in computer science. And they've been on the cover of magazines, and they have created the most innovative software ever in history. And yet we're like, why can't it do this? How come I can't, these 20-year-olds. So there was bickering going on. And I remember John Lasseter pulling us all together and saying, just have it out. So everyone's a little blah, 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 like everyone's talking over each other. And he just sits back with his arms folded and gets this big cat smile on his face. And he goes, you know what we're doing here? We're making history here. And he was like, this had to happen. This has to happen for us to, further medium.
Yeah, because the double doctorates don't know what's needed. They know what they can create, and then the animators know what's needed but don't know what's impossible.
Right.
And that is just so ripe for progress and innovation.
Oh, it was great. And the fact that he loved it, that this was chaos. Again, chaos means that things are about to change. Again, I'll repeat that. So John saw that and he assigned everyone with their double doctorate to go sit at our desks and watch us work and have us talk through what was needed to make it easier for us to work. And every day when we'd start up our computer, a new button, a new piece of software, a new something would be in there. And so what was pretty great is that we worked for the first 9 months animating the one sequence that has all the little army men carrying the baby monitor downstairs. And, you know, difficult scene to get done. It's about 3.5 minutes long, took almost 9 months. And we all got to go to SIGGRAPH, which is a big CG conference down in LA. And the company was so small, John flew all of us down. And I'm sitting with the other animators and we're watching all these crazy visual effects, which is mostly what SIGGRAPH was. And then up comes our sequence and they played it and we're all kind of nervous. We're all looking at each other. And after the scene played, there was dead silence. And I remember someone turning to me going, "We're fired, aren't we?" and and then after this long pause, there was this 10-minute standing ovation. And I remember just thinking, "Oh my God, like what have I been a part of? What is all this?"
Yeah.
The whole process of Toy Story felt like that to me. I'm sure that John and Ed and these people that were masterminding this giant risk that they were taking saw more. I'm sure they couldn't see what it would become today, but they had hopes for more, and I give them credit for such amazing innovation and having that foresight. For us, we were just like, oh my God, we're just trying to fuddle our way through this, and look what this company became. And I think sometimes the best creativity comes from that. Sometimes someone told this to me once. When you're walking over a board, if you have a little 2x4 and you set it up on two little blocks that are this high and you're walking across it, no problem. You just walk right across it. But you set that board up 100 feet and suddenly you're suddenly wobbly because all you can see is how far you have to fall. Yeah. And I think that the trap with creativity is that when these companies get very big and they've had success after success, it becomes that board that's up 100 feet and all you can see is how far you have to fall. But at that point, we were just on little blocks,
So David Wilcox, musician?
Yes.
It isn't any harder. It's just that you've got farther to fall is a wonderful song. It exactly expresses what you're talking about there. Yeah. Hey, if you were going to talk, so we have these rose-colored glasses of what it's like to work in these, like, creative and innovative, and people just dream of working at these places. What caution would you give somebody before they would step into working at one of those places? What are some of the challenges?
That's a really good question. And I feel like the one thing that over the years, when I've really gotten to talk to people who are really serious about becoming directors, producers, or even heads of departments in these studios, is that they're marathons for one thing. Like if you're going to get into an animation studio, whether it be Disney, Pixar, even Netflix now, and there's so many platforms for it. Like, by the way, the industry is exploding in a way that is so exciting right now. There's so much creative potential. But most of these projects last between a year and 4 years. And oftentimes, once they start, there is no stopping. And so that is a long marathon. A 3 or 4 year marathon is a long time. And oftentimes there's overtime and there's weekends. And I think that is the one thing that people don't realize when they get into it. But the flip side of that is that I hear other friends of mine in their jobs or their career paths, and they're like, I'm kind of bored. And I think in my head, I have never been bored one moment of my day. And I feel like I started as an animator. I've been a designer. I've been a character designer. I've been a storyboard artist. All these things I didn't know I was going to end up doing. But there's always something more to learn, and you can always get better. And if it was easy to make films, every film that you'd go see in the theater would be great. And there's a
Right.
reason they're not. It's incredibly hard. Um, and so because of that, there's this like unattainable goal. So it just keeps you going and keeps you stimulated, and you get to be creative for a living. And so there's that balance. It is kind of a dream come true, but it is a lot of time. And I think that time management thing to take care of yourself, or if you have, especially if you have kids, I made the choice not to have kids. And part of it was because of the time constraints that I was, after I've been a director now for almost 20 years. And when you step into a role like that, you're an editorial till midnight, and I've seen friends of mine, my editor tuck her kids into bed on the phone, for years. And she finally said, okay, my son's in high school. I need to go and step out of this for a while. And now she's back in it. He's in his 20s and it's fine. But like, it literally is, it's a balance, and I can only imagine same thing if your music career takes off and you're traveling the world on tours or something like that. There's a balance you have to find somehow.
Yeah, I was just talking with an executive in the insurance world. Same tension,
Right.
where and it's not balance; it's a tension that you have to, really positive tension. But this idea of choosing what you want to do. He's talked about when he made like a career killer, when he said he wouldn't move to a location that his family wouldn't work on. And
Right.
so he told them, I mean, I'll move, I just won't move there. And it killed his career in that company.
Right.
And we talked about that, and he's so thankful that he did that because he's in a great place now.
Right.
But that same sort of tension that we all have about choosing our lives and the quality of our lives, it's real definitely in your industry, but I think it transfers over people who are striving to be excellent in whatever they do.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And nowadays, it doesn't matter what career you're in. The higher you get up the ladder and the more responsibility you have, the more time um, you're more time challenged. The more
Yeah.
time is required of you. And
That's why
that's
the earlier you can figure out that you've got to bundle energy and focus into that whole equation of pace and time, the earlier you get that, the better off you're going to be in your career.
it's so
Uh,
true. And it's
hey,
funny because I talk to people. It's funny because I was going to bring up, which was one of the highlights of this last movie, was I got to use a Coldplay song "Fix You" in this movie. And when I write, a lot of times I listen to music when I'm writing, and the words and lyrics that Chris Martin wrote to "Fix You" fit this sequence so well. This is a sequence where Yi is saying goodbye to her dad, and the lyrics are tears stream down your face when you lose something you can't replace, and I will try to fix you. And it's the one time that Everest is almost speaking, I will try to fix you. And while he's pushing the violin, telling her to play and say her goodbyes, and the tears are streaming down the Buddha's face when the Marine comes, and it's all of nature is weeping for her. And it was so integral to this sequence that when we got to licensing the music, my producer came to me and she said, look, I need to prepare you. Like, I'm going to go to Coldplay's manager, but we probably won't get that song. And I was like, what? I couldn't imagine. And it had been in our temp reels for a year,
yeah.
and I was like, it never occurred to me that we wouldn't get the song. And so, she went, and we luckily did get the song. And then I got a phone call, and my assistant said, Jill, the manager from Coldplay, Phil Harvey's calling on the phone. And I was like, oh my God, what is this about? And he was like, we never give that song out, but we love what you did to it. And because of that, I've been able to meet with them and have a pretty good relationship with them. But what's so great is, like, they're no different than anybody else. I was telling them about my crash at the end, and they're like, oh yeah, the end of tour crash, we all go through it. And, talking to them even about where their inspiration comes from. And I was explaining that kind of idea that ideas are out there and it goes through the filter and they're like, we have that same idea. We call it the frame. Like it is the creative process. And it does have its ebbs and flows. And so I think you probably can't, when you're doing a project to project, whether it's with insurance or whether it's with a, giant banking company or whatever, if you have things that are packaged in a project, you probably are going to go through a time where you're working really hard and then you crash. I think it just is.
Oh, it's true. I have that crash after big initiatives that go out there. And then when you land the plane, you crash.
Right. And I think it's also natural because our adrenaline kicks in, and it gets us through this time, which is great. Our body has its natural way of staying up on energy, and then it finally crashes at the end. So knowing that's coming, I think you can say, okay, this is going to happen. How can I minimize this? Or how can I give myself time on the end to recover? How can I, I think that's part of it, is that it's not, I think these things, it's false hope to say, well, next time I'm not
I'm better than that.
Yeah, or I'll learn and then I won't crash afterwards. And I think maybe the way to think about it is, this is going to happen. How do you prepare for it? How do you, give yourself time to recover? How do you minimize the crash?
How do you align expectations with yourself and with the people around you? You're actually doing people a disservice if you don't plan on it, because they're going to have expectations of you. But if you know that you're going to be wiped out for 2 weeks and take those 2 weeks versus having it ambush you and be out for 6 months.
Yes, I agree with you. And I think that even is managing expectations of your family as well, which is knowing that you're not going to be present for a certain amount of time, spending time with them before, and then not just planning like a crazy, Disneyland getaway the second you finish the project, because you're not going to be present for your kids and your family,
So you spend a lot of time managing your bloodhounds' expectations?
I do. Actually, it's funny because Eric, he is a professional choreographer, and so he goes through the ebbs and flows too when he's preparing for a show or a routine that he's going to perform. And so they go through these same things where they're rehearsing all the time, and then after the show there's a crash. So he fully understands it, which I'm so grateful for. But at the same time, it still is hard, like I'm, down here right now and still in that process of recovering and regrouping and getting together the projects that I want to do, finishing up a script I'm working on. And some of that process is better served when I'm alone in a little cave, you know what I mean? And sometimes when I'm at home, it's harder because I want to be with the family. I want to go hiking every day. I want to be cooking. I want to go, shopping,
right,
and do all those home things that I never get to do. And so I have to almost force myself to spend some time away and then to make the most use of my time when I barricade, and go into the den. And so we all have our version of that, whether it's across the lawn in your shed, but, your 6-year-old probably only has a certain amount of times that they're allowed in your studio, right?
This is, we kind of try and keep this as a sacred space for work. 6-year-olds don't always understand that. Right. So every once in a while I'll get a knock on the door. But I want to transition to tap into your wisdom and experience, and just get your insight, just a couple of words or phrases that might help others, whether they're in the creative endeavors or they're in a situation where they want to leverage their creativity. First one is, how can we foster creativity in ourselves? What advice would you give to somebody who's looking to foster that creativity?
I mean, this sounds like a simple thing to say, but that whole phrase of no idea is a bad idea is actually really important for people who are trying to foster their own creativity. We are our own worst enemy. And I can't tell you how many sketchbooks I have where there's a drawing and then it's scribbled out And Eric used to say, why do you scribble those drawings out? You know, like you don't want anyone to see them. And I said, no, I don't want to see them. Like, and it's my own frustration with not being good enough. And the fact is, there are ideas and stories I put together almost 30 years ago at Cal Arts that are good ideas for films today. And if I had tossed them in the trash or totally forgotten about them, they just weren't, you know, I wasn't maybe fully seasoned enough to realize them. But it doesn't matter how old we are. It doesn't matter. I'll tell you, I had a mentor for a time. She was a writer. Her name was Jean Lee Love, and she used to love watching me draw. And she would say, when are you going to do a children's book? When are you? She'd always want me to do something with these. And I said, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And she said to me once, she said, what is the most perfect phase of a rose? And I said, what? And she goes, a rose. Is it the bud when there's so much potential waiting? Is it mid-bloom when it's, you know, it's not a bud anymore, it's fully kind of starting to realize? Or is it when it's full bloom at its most beautiful, days before all the petals fall off? And she said, the fact is, if you wait till that full bloom before the petals fall off, it's going to be too late. And the fact is, every stage of a rose is beautiful. And so she said, you know, you need to embrace every phase of that, knowing that at times your mind is going to be more creative than your skill level, but that will catch up. And knowing that at some point your skill level is going to catch up, but maybe your mind isn't going to be as creative. It's all there. And I think practice, practice, practice without judgment is really important, because we're all so fragile as artists, you know.
So I love that image of the rose. And I'm curious, it is a simple concept of that there's no bad ideas, but simple doesn't mean easy.
No.
What do you think is the barrier to being able to claim that those bad ideas?
I think there is like, this is weird. Throughout the years, I've known artists who everything they do is just fabulous in their eyes. And I don't mean to go there either, because there is you will never grow if you can't, to a certain extent, assess where you are and where you need to grow or challenge yourself. So as a musician or an artist, you need to either be your own feedback or find people who can give you feedback that says, this is great, but you know what you should work on is your anatomy, or you know, your shading, or your structure, or your whatever it is, or your, you know, fingering on the guitar, or your blah, 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 blah. You know, we all need to know where our weaknesses are so we can strengthen those, but not to throw the baby out with bathwater, right? You need to be able to, I'm talking more about those people that maybe were like me, where I had a very fragile ego. I thought everything I did was terrible.
Right.
And there was many of like me around, and a lot of people that I see go into the studio system, especially those newbies coming into the studio system, they're all excited because they get accepted. And then the day they start, they're like, what did I do? Oh my God, everyone around me is so good.
Yeah.
But they need to just know they'll get there. You know, they just have to keep working at it. And so
maybe the phrase should be, it's not that there's no bad ideas,
right,
but to know the value of bad ideas.
right.
Properly value all your ideas so that when it's great, you can say it's great. And when it's bad, you can say, I know what the value is in that bad idea.
Right. It's to know that all ideas have their worth,
Yeah.
and how to expand on those ideas,
Okay.
and not to give them like a horrible judgment. And I think that that's just, is that we're so hard on ourselves. And
Yeah.
and I think, especially, this is funny, but I talk to Eric about this all the time, because he also teaches dance on a regular basis. And I see people come into his dance classes and they try one class and then they just want to just give up. And they're like, they use those phrases. And every person who has never done art, especially the older we get, and then you jump into it for the first time, you do those things where you're like, well, I'm just not an artist. I was just not born with the gift you were to draw. I'm just not a musician. I don't have the ear for it. I can't dance. I was born with 2 left feet. I've heard all of those excuses. And the fact is, we can all do all of those things. We all have the ability to be a musician, a dancer, an artist. It just takes practice, and it takes some tenacity and endurance. And the fact is, if you give up that quickly, you'll never get there.
Well, and it sounds like, I mean, with courage, I mean, with all that stuff, tenacity and practice and all, it takes courage to start.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
Especially if you're older. I think people think, oh gosh, I'll never catch up to these kids that have been doing it. That's not true. Um, in fact, true story, at Cal Arts, I had gone to UC Santa Barbara for 2 years. So by the time I got to Cal Arts, most people at Cal Arts were either 18 or 19, and I was 22. And so I was looking back at these, or I was 21, I want to say. I was looking back and I was 2 or 3 years older than these other kids, and I was way less seasoned as an artist. And I went through that fear of like, oh my gosh, it's too late for me. But I thought, I'm here, I want to do this. I don't care, I'm just going to get better for me. And so I would sleep in my car sometimes. Would go to the zoo in the morning and then come back for classes, and I would sketch and sketch and sketch. And it's so funny because people in my class say, oh, you were one of the best artists in our class. And I was like, no, I was not. I was the worst one. And I kept sketchbooks from that era just so I could remind myself how horrible I was. And the other cool thing is, like, I feel like life never let me see how bad I totally was, or else I would have maybe given up. like now I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I was in public drawing that.
now that you're here, does it ever get any easier?
No. And you know what is even harder is that with more responsibility, like right now, my biggest tool set that I still use with artists is drawing. Like every day at work, you know, whether we're talking to a storyboard artist or my layout artist, we're drawing, you know, as a communication tool. And the less time I have to draw, the worse you get at it. It's like a muscle, and you work it out, right? It's just like any art form. If you put your guitar away for 6 months and you pull it out, you're like, ow, God, you know, like, ouch.
Yeah, calluses are gone.
Yes. And so if anything, it's almost harder now because I feel like I need to work out that muscle more, and I don't have as much time to do it. So the balancing act, I get embarrassed more. Like, I'm like, oh God, like,
Any advice for people who are facing that anxiety? Any advice on how they can find that courage to start?
You know, I would say there should be, I'm going to use an example. Clint Eastwood has become one of my biggest heroes in recent years. And it's because at age 80, he kind of said, you know what? I always wanted to be a director, and I was always afraid to do it. And now that I'm 80 and I see my life getting shorter, I think, what have I been waiting for? And he not only dove in to be a director, but like 1 year that he did Gran Torino and Flags of Our Fathers, he directed that movie, starred in the movie, wrote the music for the movie. Both movies won an award. He did 3 movies that year. 2 of them won awards. I mean, he is a force. He is an example of don't wait till the rose is full bloom and all the petals are about to fall off. And he says, I don't know what was stopping me. Fear was stopping me. So I would say, in that whole spirit of don't have any regrets. Well, who are you going to embarrass? Yourself? Who cares? You know, like, wouldn't you rather go through a little bit of embarrassment and not live your life going, oh, I always wanted to take a sculpting class. I always wish I got to play the guitar. The only way to do that is to start. And are you going to go through a learning period that's uncomfortable? Yeah, you are. But you'll get on the other side of that. And the fact is, living with the I always wanted to is harder than going through that short period where you're gonna have some aches and pains, right? And even if it's just for you, even if you just wanted to learn to play violin or something just for you, you know, it's those things are part of who you are, and they're desires that are born in us, and God-given desires. Like, why not explore that? You never know what it's going to open, you know?
Well, that phrase, "Can you live with I've always wanted to," I think is powerful.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Because that's a great question. Because if you can live with it, great. But if you can't live with it for something, that might be what puts you over the edge there.
What's crazy too is I always look to people, like I've been lucky enough in my lifetime. I remember um, when I first started at DreamWorks, Jeffrey Katzenberg said, "Oh, you started on a really good day because tomorrow James uh, Titanic
Cameron?
Cameron James Cameron's coming to speak," and so I got to sit kind of in the front row of this conversation that Jeffrey was having with James Cameron, and it was like listening to two people who you're like, they're not real, are they? Like these people, they're, I don't, want to regret never having done blah 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 blah, is like I never want to regret having not built something that goes into space, or I never want to regret having built a submarine that goes deeper than any, I never want to regret changing the world on this level, or creating a 3D sound system that, or cameras that are 3D visual. Like they think their what if, or I never want to, regret not having, is so far beyond a normal person that this is really what makes them innovators. It's fascinating to listen to
It's the same dynamic, just on a whole different scale.
on a whole different scale. And then you go, what? And I'm scared of taking a dance class,
Right.
it puts things all in perspective, where you're like, what motivated them to take leaps and bounds that huge that got them
Yeah.
to where they think nothing's impossible.
Yeah. Well, Jill, we've been on for quite a while now, and I really appreciate the time. And basically, I think we could talk all afternoon.
I know.
But I want to say thank you for the time. And I look forward to connecting with you more in the future, maybe a follow up to this. But thank you very much for the time you spent.
Absolutely, John. It's such a pleasure getting to talk to you, and would love to hang out sometime.